So there are 12 ballot measures on the November general election. The one that's sort of capturing the media's attention is Three Californias, this proposal to split the state into three new states: Northern California, Southern California, and California. And it's certainly not the first time that California has been proposed to split. In fact, we've been a state since 1850, and there have been over 200 suggestions that we split apart. The first one, almost as soon as we became a state, people said, yeah, you're too big. And that was when we were just geographically large and not population-wise. There were very few people living in the state of California at the beginning, but just geographically, the state is huge. And so many people have suggested. We do have one part of the state who wants to break off, and has pretty consistently fought for that. It's the Northern California counties of Northern California, and then joining with the southern counties of Oregon. They've formed the state of Jefferson, and they have a flag. They've got the Great Seal of Jefferson with the double-crossed X's for the betrayal that they've suffered from both Oregon and California, sort of ignoring them. So they have fought for many years. In fact, they went so far as to write a proclamation of independence and to elect a governor and to actually secede from the states. Unfortunately, they were a victim of bad timing. It was 1941, and they didn't check with Japan. So they formed a state. They rebelled. They held up traffic with their hunting rifles, handed out the Proclamation of Independence, and elected a governor. And then 3 days later, Japan attacked the United States in Pearl Harbor, and the United States joined World War II. And of course, the whole country mobilized on the war effort. So the state of Jefferson had to be put on hold. So they are in support of this measure of three Californians because they would get to hopefully join with their friends in Oregon to form a state. But that's not part of the proposal. But at least Northern California would be separate. So again, this is not the first proposal. It probably won't be the last proposal. There have been proposals to split us into three. There have been proposals to split us into two. There have been proposals to split us into six. Lots of different proposals. So this was one of the proposals, just a straight Northern California to Southern California, was introduced into the legislature and failed. Tim Draper has come along with a ton of money. He's a tech guy, worked for a variety of firms, and he proposed a ballot measure a few years back that would cut California into 6 different states. And so this is his proposal: Jefferson and Northern California, Central California, Southern California, West California, and then just the Silicon Valley. And if you look at the election results, you can kind of see that Jefferson would be Republican, and Northern California would be Republican, maybe because the Bay Area is going to be split into 2, and half of it is going to go in the Silicon Valley. So it would be an interesting proposal, the 6 Californians, but it failed. And so Tim Draper came back and said, I'll spend more millions of dollars on 3 Californians. And now Jefferson up here is with San Francisco, so I don't know how pleased they'll be with that split. They want to leave, but they really want to leave San Francisco. So the idea is that there would be 3 Californias, in this kind of split. And many people have pointed out, this idea that it's going to be difficult, and it is. First of all, can we do it? And that's always a question for ballot measures. So the ballot is just step one. The Constitution, Article 4, Section 3, really makes it difficult for states to split apart, which is why you don't see states splitting apart. Article 4, Section 3, first of all, requires that the state legislature propose. So I'm not sure if it can be from a ballot measure. I think that would be a court challenge immediately if it passed. But let's say it passes, and let's say the legislature then votes after the ballot measure. The legislature votes to split into 3. Step 2, it would have to go to Congress, because Congress has to approve the split. And then the president has to approve. That's going to be really unlikely. First of all, I'm not sure that the legislature will vote to approve it. I think it'll go to court. Congress is going to have a really hard time. The rest of the country, for those of you who haven't traveled a lot, the rest of the country hates us. Does not want California to become more powerful, and certainly wouldn't want us to split into 3. The only time this has ever happened, Maine and Vermont a long time ago, but since we've really gotten going, technically Kentucky was part of Virginia area, but since we've established the states, to have a state then break off, the only time we've seen that is 1863, and the reason was because we were fighting the Civil War. Lincoln very clearly, here's Washington, D.C. here. Maryland is a southern state. Virginia is a southern state. West Virginia is part of Virginia at this point. Clearly, strategically, Lincoln wants desperately to keep Maryland in the Union, and really tramples on constitutional rights, basically takes the rebels in Maryland who are talking about seceding and, essentially throws them in a dungeon, doesn't give them a fair trial, doesn't give them habeas corpus, doesn't, bring them up on charges, just basically throws them in a dungeon and says, you can come out when the Civil War is over. And so then goes to the folks in West Virginia and says, if you stay, if you vote to break away, you can become your own state. And so that took a while to actually do, and court case after court case after court case, even though, it was extraordinary circumstances of the war, but he clearly wanted to have as much territory as possible in the North, surrounding Washington, D.C. If Maryland had gone as well, if you sort of see this area, then Washington, D.C. is going to be in enemy territory and would have to retreat northward. So he certainly doesn't want that from a strategic point of view. So West Virginia gets rewarded for staying with the Union. Virginia sort of gets punished by losing part of its territory. And that's the last time it's happened. So it's very rare. It's very unlikely that the other congressmen would want to do it. And one of the main reasons is because immediately we would get 4 more senators. If we have 3 states, we would get 6 senators. So that's a disincentive. Nobody in the rest of the country wants California to have more power legislatively, and certainly not in the Senate. The Electoral College, if we're splitting that up with the representation of the Senate, at least we would be at 59 delegates, because we would get those 2 extra senators per state. Now, when we look at whether or not these would be red or blue states, Clinton would have won all 3 states in 2016. Southern California by the smallest margin, but still 42% for Clinton, 52% for Clinton, 42% for Trump. Obama, I think, maybe shows a better reflection of that, because, even Orange County went for Clinton, which is an anomaly. Normally, Orange County would be a solid Republican district. If you look at 2012, Obama would have won all 3 states, but Southern California by the slimmest of margins. When you look at the registration by state. Northern California, San Francisco's in there, so they're overwhelmingly going to be a Democratic state, which, poor Jefferson, all the Republicans in Jefferson that want to be separate from the Bay Area so that they can actually have a state that reflects their values, would be overwhelmed by the addition of San Francisco. California, that coastal region is solidly Democratic, and so you'd have an overwhelmingly Democratic state. Southern California is the only one that would have, and this is really close, of a split between Republicans and Democrats, but Democrats still have a slight edge. So, it's not a guarantee that they would have a Republican state the way that they're currently drawn. If you look at the June primary results, Cox would have won, John Cox, the Republican, here in Southern California, where Gavin Newsom overwhelmingly would have won both California and Northern California. So it kind of gives you a feel of, how the votes would shake out. And again, we can look at the division, Monterey and San Luis Obispo, Los Angeles would be in California, so that's going to give them an overwhelmingly Democratic state. San Francisco is going to overwhelm the rest of the Central Valley and Northern California. And then there's quite a bit of Republican districts here, but still a lot of Democrats to balance that state. So even with those political consequences taken into effect, even if you could get Congress to pass it, even if you could get the president, who clearly hates California and does not want us to have any more power, there are a lot of other issues that we'd have to think of, the education system, the higher education system, the roads, splitting up, water rights. I think we'd be in court for, 100 years dealing with water rights. Bonds. We as state voters have issued billions of dollars in bonds, basically guaranteeing loan payments. And I don't know how we would split those bond payments up between the three states. Our prison system, our pension system, all of these really complicated questions of, if we're going to get divorced, who gets all of these things? And would, a student from Fullerton have to pay out-of-state tuition to go to UCLA? It's just a really kind of complicated issue. So I don't know how the voters will vote. Even if they vote, even if California approves it, we've got a long way to go before we would actually be 3 Californias. The rest of the ballot, there's a link to more information about each of these, but basically the rest of the ballot, there are 2 repeal measures, one to repeal the gas tax, the other to repeal a law that limits rent control, that would allow localities to vote for rent control more easily. There are 4 bonds, so again, asking the voters to take out massive loans for water, for children's hospitals, for affordable housing, and supportive housing for those suffering from mental illness. There's a change to Prop 13 that would let older disabled homeowners kind of carry Prop 13 with them, that protection that allows lower property tax base if they move out of their home into another place in California. A kind of fix to a problem, but we don't allow, if you're on a break, you're not on call by definition, and private ambulances have to require their emergency medical technicians to remain on call during their breaks. It's the same thing we have for firefighters and police. There's a proposal to end daylight savings time, and then a couple of other measures, bigger cages for farm animals, and the dialysis clinic to pay back insurers. So that's what the ballot's going to look like. There's more information about the pros and cons of each of those in the next page.